Everyone, welcome to the UK Pavilion. It's Solutions Day. Woo! Anyway, and one of the things I'm really excited to talk about today, because it's Solutions Day and because this is the UK Pavilion, is actually having a bit of a session here about what we are actually doing with our climate finance. We spend a lot of time talking about finance in the abstract, but I think what's most exciting is when we can actually talk about what we're doing with our finance, the impact it's having in the world, and the kind of things that we can do. And with some of our partners here as well, from the Climate Investment Funds and ESMAP as well. So you'll get to hear from them as well. So I'm also going to set out that we are, as the UK, we're committed to providing space for key constituencies, including but not limited to Indigenous peoples and youth, to participate and express their priorities and concerns. And we're really committed to continue working in an inclusive manner across everything that we do, so that we can meaningfully engage all voices in what we do. And we've had so many events here where we've had diverse voices coming and sharing their experiences here, but also, like our support through the negotiations too, where we provide support to different negotiators from different countries to actually engage meaningfully as well in the negotiations as well. So if we move on, I'm doing slides today. I hope you can all see the slides okay, because hopefully you can see them for those of you sat in the middle, and hopefully for the thousands at home watching this live or maybe on repeat, because if you enjoyed it so much the first time, you can see it all as well. So what is our ICF? Well, it's our international climate finance. It's the main instrument we've got to support developing countries adapt to the impacts of climate change, reduce their emissions as well. And we have a portfolio of programmes delivered jointly across 3 government departments: the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is where I'm from, and the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I've realised I haven't even said who I am. I'm Kate Hughes. I'm Director for International Climate Finance and Strategy, and our ICF within my department sits within my team as well. So what are the commitments that we've got? And on to the next slide. There we go. So we are delivering 11.6 billion in international climate finance, and our PM was here last week talking about that as well. And we aim to ensure a balance between mitigation and adaptation finance, which we have done for many years as well, which we think is crucial to make sure that adaptation gets as much finance as mitigation. And at least £3 billion of what we are doing will be invested in development solutions that protect and restore nature as well. And actually that comes across both adaptation and mitigation, obviously, as well. So I'm going to look through over the next few slides about the impact that our climate finance spending has been delivering since 2011. So on to the next slide. So this is the most important thing. You can spend money, but why do you spend the money? It's because of the impact you have on the ground, on people's lives. And I'm really proud about how many people have been supported by our ICF programmes to date. As you can see, nearly 100 million people have been supported to adapt to climate change. We've improved energy access to clean energy for 58 million people, and improved the resilience of 31 million people as well. So if we move on to the next slide, let's put some of this into perspective. So the number of people supported to cope with the effects of climate change is the equivalent of more than 1% of the world's population, just with the UK's climate finance. And we're using our ICF as well to support gender equality goals. And this year, for the first time, we've started publishing sex disaggregated data for our ICF results. And these show that almost half of the people we support to adapt to climate change were female. That's really important. And you can access our full results and the full documents on our website as well. And on to the next slide, a bit more about people supported by ICF. Similarly, half of the people with improved access to clean energy were also female. Again, really critical for those of you who work in these sectors. Actually making sure that women have access to energy is critical for livelihoods, for the work in the home, and actually for their empowerment as well. And in total, the number of people the ICF has improved energy access for is more than the total population of Kenya. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the case studies, some of the programs that we're supporting in particular, so you can get a feel for what they are doing. So here we've got a couple of slides about our Climate and Resilience Framework Programme, or CLARE. I know this world is full of many kind of acronyms and letters, so we do try and give them, I wouldn't say exciting names, but at least you can say CLARE. So this is the Climate and Resilience Framework Programme, and it's a really great example of one of our adaptation and resilience programmes. It's improved the way that weather forecasts and climate information are produced and communicated. And the impact of this is to save lives and livelihoods. And one project has resulted in a 30% reduction in weather-related deaths on Lake Victoria. And on the next slide, a little bit more. So we've got a bit of a testimony here from someone who is, on the direct support of this programme in reducing the number of people affected by floods. Do you want me to read it out? How do people feel about that? Or can you all... No, you're all shaking. Okay, you can read it. Anyway, it's good. Part of the point of this is that actually, it's important for us to go and speak to the people who are affected by this, so actually we know, are we having the impact that we need to be having? So the next slide, we're going to talk a bit about some of our energy side of things as well. So ICF programs contribute to reducing emissions from greenhouse gases through programs that cover all sectors of the economy. And particularly, we're looking at how do we speed up that just energy transition? How do we replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources, solar, wind, geothermal? And how can we promote low carbon alternatives to non-sustainably sourced wood for domestic cooking and reducing deforestation as well? And in total, 68 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced or avoided, and 3,300 megawatts of clean energy capacity from on and off-grid clean energy sources have been installed. So on the next slide, just again to try and put this into context a bit, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions reduced or avoided through ICF is equivalent to taking all UK cars off the road for about a year. And the majority of our emission savings are in the energy supply and the land use change and forest sectors. On the next slide, the amount of clean energy installed is equivalent to the capacity of over 670 average-sized UK offshore wind turbines. The majority of clean energy installed is solar. So just trying to put a bit of perspective around what this means and what we are doing. Where it says unknown, it's just because, maybe we don't have that data through quite yet. So on to the next slide as well. One of the case studies we wanted to talk about too is the Nationally Appropriate Mitigation Actions Facility, NAMA facility. And we did an event on this last week. I'm pretty sure it was last week. I've lost track of time already. I'm sure you have too. And most excitingly, the name has been changed. For those of you who've been in this kind of world for a long time, you might remember NAMAs. They kind of came before NDCs. So we're now going to call it our Mitigation Action Facility. But anyway, the point behind this is that it helps finance measures to shift challenging sectors in a country's climate mitigation action plan. And since we launched it in 2012, over 7 million tonnes of greenhouse gas equivalent emissions have been reduced. And the programme has leveraged co-financing at a ratio of nearly 1:4 from private and public sectors. So we're looking to support projects here which are ambitious and wouldn't happen without our support. And one example is a refrigeration and air conditioning project in Thailand, which accounts for approximately 20% of Thailand's total greenhouse gas emissions. The NAMA project focused on production of equipment, capacity building, revisions to the policy and financial framework, and awareness raising of benefits as well. And on the next slide, look, we've got another little sort of testimonial here as well. So it's had a range of impacts from solar energy in Chile to the coffee sector in Costa Rica. And on to the next one, we're going to talk a bit about nature, because it's important that we also consider nature across all of this. And you'll see our results in terms of our nature portfolio here. 410,000 hectares of prevented deforestation have contributed to climate change mitigation by reducing those emissions, as well as helping to preserve biodiversity and reduce poverty through the provision of forest ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the principal framework for expressing the value of nature to human health and well-being, and they represent benefits that people receive from the natural environment, and the value of ecosystem services generated or protected as a result of ICF programming is £5.3 million to date. And a total of 910,000 hectares have received sustainable land management practices, which is equivalent to more than 1 million football pitches. That's what it looked like. They're UK football pitches, I'm sure. So, Biocarbon Fund is one of the projects which we support with other donors. It's one of our wonderful multilateral projects with the World Bank. And here, over 250,000 hectares of land has been brought under sustainable land management practices. And as an example, this project has helped make cattle farming more sustainable in Colombia. And that produces livelihoods and reduces deforestation. So initiatives like this, here we go. Here's another testimonial from Dr. Hammer. Steve, if you know him well. So it shows how we can build even stronger collaboration between those groups to achieve results. So now you can see on this slide we're onto finance, because it's important that we use our finance to mobilise other finance. That is the beauty of what we get to do with our aid budget, with our climate finance. It's that nugget of concessional finance that can unlock much, much wider flows. And since 2011, we've mobilised £5.7 billion in public finance and £5.2 billion in private finance. And one of those projects through which we mobilise finance is, this is one without a good name, I'm sorry, it's the GCPF. Bad name, but a brilliant project. It's the Global Climate Partnership Fund. We work with a whole range of different public and private partners here, and it's making sure that we can mobilise investment flows in energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And both the funding is technical assistance as well, and really valued by our partners. And this one for me is it's a super exciting project, because energy efficiency, we all know it makes a huge amount of sense, but actually often just doesn't happen because it needs that kind of little incentive to make it happen. And this project works through hundreds of I think it's hundreds of thousands of loans to farmers, to bakers, to hospitals, to invest in energy efficiency and pay back, but we do it through local banks. So we're also building up the capacity of local banks to carry on doing that and to engage in this world as well. So it has huge transformational impact. And that's the next bit that I want to talk about, transformational change in the ICF. So we know our climate finance is only a small part of the necessary action needed to tackle climate change. So we try to be transformational, and we use this word a lot, and enable change which catalyses further change to maximise the impact of our funding. And over time, more of our ICF programmes are showing clear evidence that transformational change is judged very likely. So it's a bit of a gamble, but we're trying to work out where are we having impact, and are we having that real catalytic impact that we need to be taking. So now I've given you a bit of an overview about what we're doing. I want to pass over to Danny Morris, Senior Climate Change Specialist and Lead for the Climate Investment Fund's Energy Programming, and we work with the CIFs a huge amount. We're very excited to be working with them still, and Danny's going to tell you a little bit more about what the CIFs are up to.
Thanks, Kate. Great pleasure to be here with you all today. As she said, my name is Danny Morris. I'm with the Climate Investment Funds. Full disclosure, before I joined the Climate Investment Funds, I was working for U.S. government, where I had a chance to work with Kate and her colleagues sort of on the governance side of the CIFs. And the UK was always a strong champion for the CIFs. They've done great work. And I'll say in particular on the front of not just knowledge management, but evaluation and learning and understanding what transformational change is. Our work in CIF would not have happened without the UK. So I'm here to talk a little bit about that today, and look forward to kind of sharing our work with you all. So next slide, please. So, from its inception in 2008, the climate investment funds were designed to do things a little bit differently. I mean, initially we were designed to help the international financial architecture understand how to do climate finance. And as part of our original mandate, the words transformational change were used. In 2008, I think we didn't quite have the understanding of climate finance that we had today, and so there was a lot to define. People could sort of talk about what transformational change meant within that context, but no one necessarily had a very clear understanding and a common understanding. And that persisted years, forward as the international climate finance architecture grew. As negotiations grew, we still sort of lacked a framework to really understand that. So in 2017, we recognized that there was an opportunity here, and very much with encouragement from the UK and their support, we were able to sort of look and see that the transition to sustainable economies really needed unprecedented transformations in socioeconomic sectors in ways that we needed to better understand. So we took the opportunity to not only gather evidence, but look at our portfolio and add some rigor to our processes to come up with a common definition of what transformational change is. So next slide, please. So we embarked on a journey of developing the concept of transformational change and what it means. I want to start with the definition here. By our work, transformational change means fundamental changes in systems relevant to climate action with large-scale positive impacts that shift the and accelerate the trajectory of progress toward climate-neutral, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development pathways. So there's a lot there. I think it is relatively clear. I guess one thing I'll point out is that large-scale positive impacts. Just because something is a transformational change doesn't mean it's going to be positive in terms of climate. And I think you all could probably think of examples. So part of this definition is really meant to make sure that we are looking at the positive impacts that things are moving forward in a trajectory that we want to see. Next slide, please. I just very quickly, following that definition, want to talk about the body that has been put together to help expand that definition and apply it in different sectors. We have been able to develop the Transformational Change Learning Partnership, which will enable collaborative learning and transformational change understanding relevant to climate action and can bring voices into these conversations that maybe haven't been there before. The TCLP network has grown a lot in the past 5 or 6 years. So we've gone from really starting from scratch to over 600 individuals from more than 250 institutions coming together and talking about transformational change in the 4 interest groups you see here. And the work that they do, next slide please, is really understanding the elements of the transformational change framework. If we can get the next slide up, then I can show you sort of what that looks like. So here you have, working down from our definition, we talk about dimensions, guidance questions, and signals. We're going to get into all of this. Maybe we'll start off by sort of recognizing that with the definition on top, we really needed people to have something to talk about when they talked about transformational change. You can imagine that people talk about it all the time, but maybe don't have a clear understanding of what they mean, or maybe they just don't have the words to describe it. So this definition really sets the framework, it sets the boundaries in which we try to have this conversation, but it's very broad, right? So then we have to define the dimensions of transformational change. What does that look like? What are specific aspects of it that we can use to gauge whether we're succeeding or not succeeding? Once those dimensions have been established, then we have these guidance questions that can provide guidance as you work through the dimensions to determine, is a project, is a program having the transformational change we want to see, or does it have the capacity to do that over time? So those guidance questions can help really define what that looks like. And then finally, we have signals that along the way help us understand, are we on the right path, gauge whether we're doing what we want to be doing, or if we need to change course a little bit. So we can dive into each of these very quickly. With the dimensions, We start with relevance. So relevance, as you can see up here, speaks to the alignment with and attentiveness to goals and context through time. So an action needs to be relevant to climate action, but it needs to be relevant within its specific context, what has been planned, and sort of how it's aligned with other types of action. Next to that you have, or below that you have systemic change, right, which is present in our definition. We need to understand what are the underlying systems and mechanisms that sort of go with this intervention, and how do we change those over time, and how does it rest within a larger system of action. Next to that we have speed. Speed is an important one because we want things to move fast, but we're in a place when you take into considerations of justice, vulnerability. You don't want to move fast and break things. You want to move as fast as you can without breaking too much, right? So with speed, it requires an attentiveness to complexity. And we need to understand that there will be impacts on communities, on economies at different scales, and we need to ensure that equity and justice are considered when we do that. Next, we have scale. Here at SIF, we love to talk about scale, how our interventions can help bring things to scale. Scale has many aspects, right? What policies are being developed? How are they being developed? How are they being implemented? That's what we call vertical scaling, right? You can sort of see the decision tree, how that works. But there's other type of scaling. Issues concern how many people are being involved. You can think of that as horizontal scaling and sort of bringing communities of practice together. And then finally you have what we call depth scaling, which is, are people, enough people, taking on the understanding necessary to support the goals of whatever you're trying to achieve? And I guess when I talk about interventions, just as an aside, we're talking about the type of investment projects that we do on the ground. We're also talking about different investment facilities that we might support, and learning initiatives that are a big part of the work we do at SIF. And so finally, all this feeds into adaptive sustainability, which really speaks to the robustness, resilience, and adaptiveness to change that go with any kind of action. So looking at our ability to learn, the way we do things, are they where we want them to be? And are we also building resilience so that we don't have any backsliding as conditions change on the ground? Next slide, please. So those are the dimensions. Now we sort of talk about how that works in a dynamic context. The nature of the relationships between the dimensions is not linear, right? It can be nuanced in many ways too, and so you really do need to kind of look in context at how they're interacting with each other. The relevance dimension is particularly important because it happens throughout the transformational change process, and it's linked to the ongoing process of alignment with different contextual factors and goals. So you always kind of need to be considering, are we creeping away from what we want to achieve? How relevant is the action we're taking to the goals that we have? Speed, as I said, is also important because it relates to the acceleration of these processes, these transformational processes. So you might get early signals that are relatively modest, but a sufficient combination of systemic changes might be needed to overcome barriers and enable conditions to boost things so that you can actually move faster. And finally, as change advances and you get new equilibriums, the adaptive sustainability dimension takes on a greater importance because you really have to apply it to different contexts and opportunities. So that's a lot. How do you organize all that in your head? On the next slide, I'll show you. We've come up with the guidance questions that I've mentioned earlier, right? Here we sort of have the ones that correspond to each dimension. For relevance, the question is, what's required, what is planned, and how are those things aligned? And so you ask that question, that becomes a guidance question as you work through relevance issues, and you think about, again, context. What's your proposed action? How does that proposed action align with other things? I won't go through all these, but happy to talk to all of you about them. Know that we have these guiding questions to help us understand the considerations of the dimensions themselves and how they interact with each other. And as I said, this is dynamic, so it's something that can be considered over time. Next slide, please. So here is how we sort of apply this work to our project cycle. Very quickly, the climate investment funds, we have a number of different programs. Within those programs, we take what we call a programmatic approach, which is essentially asking participating countries to develop investment plans, focused investment plans that will allow them to have impact in the areas where they want to have impact. So looking at transformational change in our cycle, you have program design, which is you initially put together a program and transformation is considered from the beginning. What are the investment criteria that you'll need to incorporate into that program? What's an integrated framework, integrated results framework look like so that you can consider that? You move that on to country selection. Criteria the country should be considering when they apply to participate in the program, specifically these dimensions of transformational change. Once they're selected, how do they understand that as they put together their investment plan, and how do they execute that through their investment plan? So we can put together capacity building clinics, we can put together workshops, we can sort of educate the practitioners on the ground, both in the country and also in our implementing entities, which are the multilateral development banks, our very important partners. Then that goes into implementing the program itself and ensuring that as investment plans move forward, they take these things into consideration, down to the next square, which is project implementation. Is every project sort of using these investment criteria in a meaningful way? And how can we monitor that, right? So we put together monitoring toolkits and evaluative studies to help us understand what transformation looks like, how it's being considered, etc. And then as these projects evolve and mature, we do midterm and end-term evaluations and also transformational change evaluations to see if everything has been captured. Next slide, please. And I think I'll just end very quickly with a brief talk about how we're applying this in a specific program. So as Kate said, I'm in charge of our energy programs. We have a new one focused on renewable energy integration. And so we've taken the transformational change concepts and incorporated it at sort of all levels. So we use the guidance questions and have developed a toolkit to support adaptation or adaptive learning throughout the program cycle. We put on clinics so that people can understand those toolkits. It actually is a big internal piece that we work on with countries, with MDBs, and our CSO partners, other partners who are involved in these projects. So we in the REI program have changed our investment criteria to ensure that transformational change is considered at all levels. We're also sort of developing a responsive research window so that we can understand how MDBs and countries incorporate these concepts in their proposed projects, and then how we can turn around and help them design those projects in a meaningful way. So all that's going to feed into what we're calling our REI learning platform, which will be sort of an adaptive, dynamic platform where we can educate countries, they can educate us on their needs, desires, MDBs can bring their learning to bear, and we can all move forward together in trying to execute what we hope are transformational programs. So I think I will end it there. Thank you all for the opportunity, and again, big thanks and appreciation to the UK for allowing us to come and talk to you about our approaches.
Thank you so much, Danny, and I think a huge thank you, because I remember years ago when we talked to the CIFs about transformational change and how important it was to us, and it was clearly important to the CIFs as well, and really grappled with this and have set out such a clear framework for why it's so important that is underpinning all of their programmings. And I think the really interesting thing which strikes me too is that we talk a lot about things like just energy transitions, but a transition does kind of almost imply a bit more of a linear, simple movement. What we're talking about here is transformations, and actually maybe we should be talking about just energy transformations, because it's complex, as Danny was saying. It's not linear. You need to be flexible, you need to adapt, you need to learn as you go, and it's got to be across all kind of sectors and pull all of those pieces together. And that's also a good link now in for me to invite Gabriela to join us up here as well. She's the practice manager for ESMAP, which is the energy program in the World Bank, which is also working really closely with countries exactly on those transformations that need to happen to take us towards net zero. Thank you, Gabriela.
Thank you, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be here with you today. So indeed, I mean, the concept, the definition of transformational change is very interesting, and I think the CIF will really guide everyone on this because it's a real challenge. So let me tell you a little bit about the SMAP program, and then how we are actually using resources from the UK to implement the energy transition. I have to start by thanking the UK government for the contributions to SMAP, for the continuous support over the years, and also for the UK expertise, because we do rely substantially on the British expertise coming from universities and other experts. So can you go to the next slide, please? Next one, please. So let me just tell you a little bit about SMAP, what SMAP is. We are a multi-donor trust fund embedded in the World Bank. It was established in 1983 to respond to the aftermath of the global energy crisis in the 70s. So it's quite old. We're going to be 40 years old next year. And we're quite emblematic because we've been supporting energy, decarbonization, and energy poverty for about 40 years. Consistently, and I think the role of SMAP in our energy sector operations at the bank is really critical because we support project preparation, and we also co-finance some of the projects that we have at the World Bank. Our business plan is a little bit complex. We have about 28, 29 technical windows, all of them supporting either decarbonization to achieve climate stabilization or energy access programs to achieve universal access of energy, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So we are fully integrated within the World Bank operations. Half of our staff are actually working in the field with World Bank colleagues. So next, please. So let me tell you a little bit about our results. And next one, please. And I'm going to deep dive a little bit on a few of the programs that are supported by the UK, renewable energy, the powering past coal programs, industrial decarbonization, and of course accelerating coal transition. As I said, we have 28, 29 technical windows, but we really use the resources from BASE and FCDO to support industrial decarbonization, renewables, and coal transition, very focused on that. So first of all, the objective of our renewables window really is to scale up renewables. Here we are trying to apply the principles of transformational change because we look at renewables from a systemic point of view. We support, we have a number of indicators, of course, results indicators that are measured by our UK colleagues systematically and periodically. We support our client countries, introduce plans, strategies, roadmaps, new policies, new regulations, and we try to really engage with them in the delivery of those programs in renewables that will allow us to achieve the NDCs and the national policies that our clients have. So we, so far in ESMA, we have informed about 28.1 gigawatts of renewable energy, which is quite substantial, just by supporting a large number of countries in deploying wind, solar, geothermal, and hydropower. Now we are mobilizing a large volume of public and private finance. First, we mobilize World Bank financing, our IBRD and IDA lending particularly. We've mobilized 3.9 billion with this support to renewable energy, and we mobilized 3.3 billion in private finance. The number of countries that are benefiting from ESMAP in renewables is about 26 in co-financing of projects, in supporting with climate finance, but really it's a larger number of countries that we support with just technical assistance. We also support a large range of innovative technologies. For example, battery energy storage, innovative solar, and this is floating solar, or for example, distributed energy resources, distributed solar on the demand side, and offshore wind. Offshore wind is one of our most interesting programs at the moment. And of course, we're also supporting hydropower, because hydropower, at the end of the day, is very important to allow us to integrate a large volume of renewables in the grid. And nowadays, hydropower is seen more as a means to integrate renewables rather than just as hydropower for the purposes of delivering electrons. It's also going to be a very important strategy for introducing renewables. And of course, we also support various other components, and particularly in our renewable energy projects, we're very focused on closing gender gaps, because this has been an issue in the industry, in the jobs agenda, in the supply chain of the renewable energy industry, and in the communities in which we are placing or locating renewable energy projects. So next one, please. So in renewables, we have a number of programs. One of them is the offshore wind program that is advancing very well. We've been supporting about 20 countries with technical assistance, as basically the development of roadmaps or supporting policy regulation, looking at the ways you can procure or design auctions to deliver offshore wind. Now, at this point, we don't have a project in offshore wind yet. We hope that the first one will be India. We are now working on a concept note and trying to design something that's quite specific for India. We're also looking into potential projects in Colombia, Philippines, Azerbaijan, and other countries where we are working, deploying technical assistance and capacity building in institutions to make sure that they understand what it means to deliver this. We recently published our key factors report, which is basically clarifying all of the building blocks or all of the things that you need to do to deliver offshore wind. Next one, please. We also have a program that we call Sustainable Renewables Risk Mitigation Facility that's supporting our clients to implement what we call sustainable, resilient, renewable energy programs focused on attracting investors, private sector participation, while at the same time maximizing the socioeconomic benefits for communities. So these projects are very focused on mitigating risk and kind of customizing products, risk mitigation products, depending on the risk, whether it's exchange rate risk or a liquidity risk, or we see a lack of non-payment risk, for example, where in settings where the utilities are not well performing. So we are very focused on delivering renewables with a framework that looks into supporting the enabling environment, investing in critical infrastructure, such as transmission and distribution lines, and of course, solar wind park infrastructure, looking into PPPs, public-private partnerships, how do you design that, but also very focused on making sure that there is a robust procurement, and of course the risk mitigation coverage. Ultimately, what we do in our projects is to blend finance. We use the SMAP grant resources that come from governments like the government of the UK to support projects at the upstream with technical assistance, but then we use also concessional finance, development finance, our IBRD and IDA lending, and results-based finance to deliver those projects in the ground. So we are doing a lot of blend financing, as we call it. Next one, please. There are many examples of projects that we are supporting under the SRMI facility, the renewables facility. It has gradually expanded to the point that now we are in all regions, supporting a wide range of countries, as you can see on the right side of my slide, in Africa, in East Asia and Pacific, in Europe and Central Asia, Latin America, Middle East and North Africa. And we are now actually present in 55 countries supporting renewable energy scale-up. We've leveraged about 4.3 billion, which has surpassed our target in renewables, the target we have in our business plan. And we have mobilized 4.26 billion in private finance. And as I said, we're mobilizing capital from various different sources, climate investment funds, the Green Climate Fund, and of course, other sources, especially private sources. Next one, please. There are many examples. Here I'm highlighting the example of St. Lucia, only because this is very recent. We just approved this project that's going to support the development of geothermal, a 30 megawatt plant. It is a very difficult setting where you really need to introduce risk mitigation. It's a 23 million project. And what we are doing here is the risking geothermal exploration drilling, which is at the upstream of the spectrum. And without that, it's very difficult that you attract private sector participation. So that's in geothermal. Next one, please. Now, we are also supporting the Powering Past Coal program. There is a lot we are doing on the Powering Past Coal. We are supporting transition away from coal in Indonesia, India, and Pakistan. We are tailoring technical assistance to support clean energy, but also coal phase-out. And as I said before, we support the enabling environment, policies, regulation, roadmaps, the economic and technical work, feasibility and pre-feasibility assessments, etc. So with our grants, we are able to prepare, design projects that we believe are transformational and that will also be very well integrated into the national policies and the systemic strategy that's present there for decarbonization in general. It's interesting that 80% of our base-supported SMAP grants actually integrate activities that are aimed at closing gender gaps. So most of our activities are focused on bringing women to the projects and integrating gender considerations into our project design. And of course, there is a lot of focus on strengthening institutional capacity to transition from unabated coal-fired power generation. So we are now present in about 12 countries doing this. Next one, please. Just a quick example. In Indonesia, for example, we supported with a grant, a sustainable least cost electrification plan, looking into the 10 most important islands in Indonesia. And this is helping us to prepare a large program for results operation, where we are going to build a 1 gigawatt of solar capacity that will displace 450 megawatts of new coal projects. SMAP has been supporting the technical assessments necessary for this coal phase-out. We are informing and shaping the design of the project. It's a 485 million IBRD investment blended with climate investment funds and CTF and others, the Green Climate Fund. The operation is targeting 6 megawatts of solar and 350 megawatt hours of battery energy storage. Next one, please. And we are also supporting with the under the Powering Past Coal program various energy efficiency and industrial decarbonization projects in China, Uzbekistan, and Western Balkans. I will not go through the details, but I think it's important to realize that SMAP is very present on the end use, decarbonization of transport and industry, because the focus on power sector is very important, but then you need to electrify the end use, and we are across the board trying to do this with various different transformational operations. Next one, please. Thank you. Of course, industrial decarbonization, our program is structured around 3 broad areas, looking at technologies, improving energy efficiency, and reducing demand for carbon-intensive products. In industry, there are various things we are doing. We are looking into shifting traditional industrial sites and converting them into sustainable, green, efficient industrial parks. We are trying to support our clients with energy efficiency across the board, looking into electrifying as much as possible the different operations in cement and steel, and of course also trying to bring new technologies such as hydrogen or supporting renewable energy placed on site, etc. So we're doing a wide range of operations in industry, looking into, of course, the most energy-intensive countries, China, Indonesia, South Africa, and various sub-Saharan African countries as well. Next one, please. One of the projects we just approved at the bank, and everyone is talking about it now in COP27, is the ESCOM Just Transition project. ESMAP was very, very involved in the design of this project. We supported the technical pre-feasibility assessments, the economic assessments, the environmental assessments. We look into the socioeconomic benefits that could potentially come out of this project. This is a project that's going to decommission the Komati coal-fired power plant, which is almost a 1 gigawatt plant. We are going to repurpose the site with the plant with solar, wind, and battery energy storage. There is a strong focus on creating opportunities for workers and communities. Things like retraining or reemployment for economic reemployment, of course, of the workers, economic diversification, stakeholder engagement, community empowerment. Of course, there is a gender focus as well. This is a large operation. It's $439.5 million with Canadian Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility resources, and also $10 million from ESMAP. This is a climate investment fund also initiative. Last but not least, my last slide. Oh, okay, I thought I had a last slide with a picture of my team, but it's not showing. Anyways, thank you very much for your attention, and Kate, over to you. To you.
Thank you so much for that, and so much happening. And we were just wondering, on that last picture, it looked like a bungee jump from the coal chimneys. I mean, you know, kind of amazing ways that you can kind of, you know, find new ways of working. And thank you to, you know, ESMAP for all of that targeted, flexible work, a whole range of support you heard there, you know, from the transmission lines right through to energy access, a whole range of different countries, large scale, small scale projects as well. But, you know, without that underlying initial support, none of these projects would be able to happen. So thank you for your help on that. We're not a huge audience here, I recognise, but I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm sure we'd be happy to take any. You may not, but I hope everyone found it interesting and useful just to hear a bit more about actually the kinds of things our climate finance is going on and the real-world impact we're having. No pressure, don't worry. I don't think there are any questions, in which case let me just say a huge thank you to Danny, to Gabriela, and actually to all of our teams across all of our programs who actually do all of this work in our teams, but then also all the people on the ground who actually make it happen too. So thank you to both of you, and a huge thank you, I think, from all of us to our teams as well. Thank you very much.